Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you're good after last night. I'm still trying to cope with it. And yeah, we got Barry Meade here, the co founder and director of Fireproof Games, and he will talk today about the room and a little bit about the background story, I believe. So, Barry, it's all yours.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me all right? Yep. Okay, I have given this talk quite a few times. I've been asked to do it, so if you've seen it before, I apologize for boring you a second time. Uh, but I do get asked, our game has been very successful. We're now in the third iteration. We've sold 10 million copies of the game on mobile as a premium game, which is pretty rare. So I often get asked to come to conferences and talk about how to sell millions of games on mobile. And I will admit straight up front, that's not something I know anything about. I couldn't begin to tell you how your game is going to sell millions. We don't even really know why our game has sold really well. But I can give you a few, you'll certainly learn some things that happened to us along the way that maybe make it a bit more obvious for you guys. Our story is pretty particular to us, so it's not necessarily going to work for everybody else. But hopefully, if I just come and tell it to you, you can pick up bits and pieces here and there that will make sense for you and your team and whatever you guys are working on. And in that way, it'll be useful, I hope. Um, so, yes, um, Fireproof Games. We started with 6 founders in late 2008, and we met working here at Criterion Studios, where we worked on these games, Burnout 3, Burnout 4, Black, and Paradise. And we were the we were basically 6 environment artists. We started on Burnout 3, and by Burnout 4 and Paradise, we were actually the lead artists on the game. So we designed and built all of the cities and the tracks for the racing. Um, Criterion was a great place to work. It was very ambitious. They wanted to make really good games, which we found very motivating. They also did something very well. Has anyone here played Burnout? Okay, so Burnout, you'll remember, is a racing game, but it's really about crashing, right? It's kind of what the game is about. So what Criterion did really well was they chose one thing that differentiated their game from everybody else, and then they honed that to death. They tried their best to make the crashing in the game the best crashing that any other game has. And that idea of focusing was something that we took to heart and we took with us when we left. And we applied it to almost everything we did, including the way we think about business and the artwork we created. So we were 6 artists. We wanted to leave Criterion. We'd been there for 5 years at that stage. We were worried that our team, which had worked really well together, we were a very solid, tight team. We worried that we would get broken up because it was the era of outsourcing had begun in the console industry, and we thought that our team would get pulled apart and put on different EA projects, and we wanted to stay together. So we left the company and we started to go freelance. So we started Fireproof Studios, basically to become freelance artists to work to help other people make their games, I guess. Um, uh, we had, I suppose, a few different notions about how that might work, how we were going to, because it's a very competitive industry doing freelance. Is anyone here in freelance industry? Do you make work for hire? Anyone? No? One. Okay, well, it's a tough industry, right? There's lots of competition. It's very difficult. It's difficult now, and it was difficult then. Just behind you, this is some of the clients that we worked with. We worked on some great games with some great people. But when we left Criterion, we had already hired, as the internal team of Criterion, we were hiring freelancers to help us make Burnout Paradise. And the one thing we noticed about them was they were great artists. They could build really good stuff for us, but they weren't great designers. They couldn't really help us come up with game ideas. You know what I mean? They couldn't really blue sky with us, so they were kind of limited in that sense. Whereas the internal team, we were able to do that. And on Burnout Paradise, we designed the whole city. All of the gameplay was done by the art team, not by the designers. So that was we found that really interesting, and we wanted to go out and with our freelance art team, we wanted to try and take those core game making skills and sell those instead of going to a company and saying, hey, we'll build you all your lampposts for your game, or we'll build you 50 buildings or whatever. Instead of doing that, we went to them and said, well, look, what game are you making? Get us in at the start. We'll help you design the game right from the beginning, and then we'll build prototypes for you, and that in that way become much more useful much earlier in the chain. And that was how we thought we could differentiate ourselves. And I have to say, when we started doing that, that was very weird. People didn't really understand that at all, because companies didn't do that, right? All of the fun stuff was kept in-house, right? The design, coming up with all the games, the overseeing of that. But what they didn't want to do was the tedious work, like if they had to build 200 buildings or 2,000 buildings in the case of a game like Paradise. They didn't want to do that, so that was the stuff they outsourced. Whereas we were coming in sort of attacking that and saying, well, we are an outsourced team, but we want to do, the fun stuff because we're good at it. And that was a hard sell. But it did actually work out for us in the end. We found some really good clients who trusted us. Like Meade Molecule, we worked really closely with, and we ended up getting very sort of invested in their development cycle, and they relied on us a lot to do not key work in the game, but stuff that needed design ethic applied to it that they couldn't just hand out to somebody. They had to have someone who knew how to make video games come in and do this work for them, and we were able to help them out with that. And that was just one example. We did that with other people as well. We worked on Blur. Does anyone remember the game Blur? It was a racing game. Okay, so Blur 2 was on the cards. We'd actually designed and built Blur 2. No one knows this, but we'd already designed and built it, the whole game. It never got made in the end because the company that was shut down. And a lot of these companies don't exist anymore, but that's video games. It's tough. But what we also wanted to do was to make our own video games ultimately, right? So that was the whole impetus of us leaving, was like, if we go away, do this, earn some money, hire a team, we can make our own video game one day. We thought we could do a PSN or Xbox Live game, something small, but it would still cost a lot of money. I have to say, we worked for 4 years, pretty much non-stop. After our first year, which was very tough in business, but after our first year, we were non-stop working. We didn't want for work. But at the end of those 4 years, we'd made next to no money. We'd made a living, but as far as money in the bank, we had about 70, 80,000 pounds to show for 4.5 years' work. But because we decided we wanted to make video games, that defined the scope of our business. Because if you want to make money in outsourcing, you have to deal in scale. You have to be able to produce on scale, or you have to hire a lot of people to be able to take on very big contracts, because the margins are very small. We didn't want to do that because our ultimate goal was to make our own video game. And when that happened, we didn't want to have 50 artists sitting in a room with nothing to do while while the directors are away trying to come up with a video game, because that would have just destroyed the business. So we actually went kind of the opposite way to most outsourcing studios, in that we didn't grow. We rejected growth as an idea. We only took on jobs that we could do on our own or with very little help. And in the 4 years after the 6 of us founded the company, we'd only hired 4 more people, even though we were working non-stop the whole time. So that was specifically because we wanted to make a great studio before we wanted a great business. We wanted really good people working for us and nobody else, on a very small team that we knew how to control, just to get rid of all of the overheads of that, so that we didn't have to worry about that financially or energy-wise or time-wise. It was not something that was going to distract us when the time came to make our own video game. So, we were a bit of an anti-business in that way. We just wanted to exist and make some money and put it in the bank for that day when we finally got a chance to make a video game. But the money that we made was so low, like 70, 80,000 pounds to make a console game is a joke. You can just about do it now, but back in 2010 or whatever, you couldn't. The console platform holders have got a slap in the face from the mobile industry, right? So now it's a bit easier to make those games, and certainly on Steam, Steam is great for any small indie studio. It's a great platform, but so is mobile. So anyway, at the end of 4.5 years, we looked around and we figured there's just no way we can make this game, right? We cannot afford to make a game for Xbox or for PlayStation. So what can we do? So at that stage, we kind of took our phones out and went, well, mobile is kind of a thing. Like, that seems to be taking off. Maybe we could make a mobile game. And it was a combination of iOS and Unity came along right at that time. And Unity was the first free, low-cost development environment for people like us. And we thought, well, if we used Unity and published on mobile, we could actually make something. Now, we didn't know anything about mobile, and certainly Unity was still new to us as well. But we figured, well, fuck it, we'll probably be able to at least if we do something, we can say we tried. Okay, we didn't really know how to approach it, and like I said, we didn't know much about the mobile industry, and to be honest, we didn't really like mobile games. So it was a bit of a risk, I suppose, in that way. But we figured, scope the idea, right? If we scope what we have and make sure that the idea that we come up with is doable in, say, 6 to 8 months by a very, very small team, we could potentially make something and get it out. So we used that money, that 70 to 80,000 pounds, to hire our first programmer. So he came on board, Rob, and not really knowing what to do, we figured, all right, we'll spend January, February, and March making 3 different demos of 3 different game ideas. And then at the end of that period, we'll decide which of the 3 we think is the best game to take forward and finish, and then we'll release that. So I'll just I'll give you an example of what we were thinking at the time. This was our first idea. This we made in January. It was called Tiny Planets. If anyone's ever seen Angry Birds Spaced, anyone know that game? Well, it's pretty much this game. So this will tell you something about ideas and how, ideas you think are great are not really that great. Probably someone else has them. Probably 10 other people have them. This game we made for about a month. And the idea was this little rocket you see here. You're supposed to try and use the gravitational pull of planets to slingshot a rocket across space and hit the other planet that you want. What we did want to achieve with this game, in fact, with any game we made on mobile, was we made the decision to make it the platform specific. Whatever game we were going to make was going to take advantage of the touchscreen and take advantage of how people use mobile devices, rather than get a crappy virtual D-pad type game where you're running around in 3D space or whatever. It's just not suited to the platform. We wanted to build something for people who own these devices, something proper. So it had to be a touchscreen game, a touchscreen based idea. And so all of the ideas that we came up with were, at least, even if they were shitty, at least were touchscreen based and were built specifically for the platform. Because that's the attitude we would have with a console game, right? We would build something for the controller, and so that it felt really good on the controller. And we wanted to make something that felt really good to play on mobile. So much as this was quite a simple game and didn't really go anywhere, and in fact it was the kind of game you were supposed to make on mobile. It was kind of cutesy and simple and had not really got any depth, and it would, the sessions would last really very short. And it was the kind of thing, Mark, our creative director, would say it's the kind of thing you're supposed to make in mobile. It was a non-threatening, accessible, certainly not in any way hardcore game. But what it did do well, just to go back to the Angry Birds Space. Angry Birds Space came out about 2 months after we'd finished this demo, so we would have just completely fucked ourselves if we'd actually gone ahead and made this. But nonetheless, what it did do well was it was very tactile. It genuinely felt cool when you were trying to get the rocket across space. You were using your fingers. It felt really tactile, and that was something that we did want to happen with our games. The second game we made, excuse me, in February was called Puzzle Box. The idea of this game was, if anyone knows anything about Japanese and Chinese puzzle boxes, they're like jewelry boxes, except that you have to, instead of just twisting a key and opening the lid, you might have to do 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 different movements like that in order to open the box. They're like secret boxes. That's the idea of them. And they're half a game and half a box. And we figured that if we made a game around that idea, that might really work because it's tactile. It's the kind of thing you could do. So imagine you had an object floating in 3D space and you could move the camera around it and then just touch it. And then grab pieces of it and move it in 3D space. We figured that would actually work really well. We also remembered games like Zenbound. Does anyone remember that really old mobile game? Zenbound? No? All right, okay. Phew, makes us seem more original. But that was one of the first mobile games that came out that was fully 3D, that had a beautiful object hanging in 3D space, and you could move a camera around it. It was a very simple game, But it was one of the first games that came out where people, when they bought, when Apple first came out with the phone, people would buy this game just to show it off and go, "Wow, look at this! Look what my phone can do!" Because it looked really nice, right? It was beautiful. It was very simple, but it was beautiful, and it was really like a bit of a wake-up call for people, you know, because like it made people think, "Well, these phones are going somewhere, you know, maybe something cool. You can do 3D. Well, that's new." Anyway, so we just kept working on this. We did a 4-week our 4-week attempt on it. And we found at the end of those 4 weeks, we just liked it so much, we just didn't stop making it. We never went on to game idea number 3. We just kept going with this. And like 6 months later, it turned into The Room, which is the game that we actually released. And I will tell you that as we were making the game, we made it up as we went along. We did not plan the game in any way, and most of the decisions, like once a game is a hit, it's quite easy to look back at it and say, well, it was obviously going to be a hit because it does, you know, it's this, it's that, it's the other. After the fact, it's very easy to call that out. But at the time, the reason why we made the game, the reason why it's shaped the way it is, the reason why it was the size it was about an hour and a half of play, the reason why it looked the way it did, was all based on the makeup of our team, our circumstance, our finances. That really shaped what we did, how we did it. So we didn't have time to plan anything out. We just had to make it. So we came in every day, played the game, and just made it up as we went along. We didn't know what we were making. We didn't know what it was going to look like at the end. We certainly didn't know what the game was called. That only came right at the end. Like when we were desperate for a name, we just sort of went, "Oh, what about The Room?" You know what I mean? Like it's easy after the fact to look back at it all and think that it was just some work of you know, fine thinking and great design and all that. And I'm not knocking the work we did. We're very proud of the game. But I think that naturalistic way of developing it really helped us in the end, especially as a small team. Because ideas, you know, I hate to say, are easy. Good ideas are easy. Good ideas are not rare. In fact, there's ideas all over this industry, all over the place. Everybody has them. The difference is execution. It's, you know, ideas are not something that we're short of, but the world is short of really well executed good ideas. That is what video games is missing a lot of. And so we concentrated very, very much on executing the idea as well as we possibly could. So we designed a game that was very, very short in order that we could polish the shit out of it. We had time at the end to polish the shit out of it. Remember, we only had 6 months to make this game. We had 2 people on it full time. So the game really cost about £70,000 to make in total, which will give you an idea of how tight everything was for us. But we made the game really short and very simple, specifically so that we had time to polish it. So that we knew that the way we approached it was, we're up against the big guys. If we're going to release a game at all, we have to compete with the best. Now, we can never compete with the budgets and the marketing strategies and whatever of all of the other people who are releasing games on mobile. But we had to compete with them on quality, one way or the other, because the players will not accept second best, right? That's just the reality. So we had to make something small enough so that for the brief hour and a half you played it, it was at least as polished as the 10-hour game that Ubisoft would make or EA would bring out or something. And so that's the way we approached it, was make something very, very small that we can you know, just polish until it's a bit of a gem. And that's what we tried to do when we went out of our way to try and make that happen. So, you know, I can tell you, before this game was released, we completely expected this game to. Everyone else we knew who's making mobile games was you know, tanking. No one was making money. No games were selling, and these were people who knew how to make good video games. So we expected our game to come out, get a few pats in the heads because it looks nice, and nothing would happen. That it would basically tank. But our attitude was, if we make this game really well, even if it never sells a copy, we can at least then use it as a calling card for our business to say, look, we make good stuff. Here's a game that we made on mobile, and people would be able to say, yeah, this is cool. You know, we might give you some work out of it. That was kind of where we were with it. So on multiple levels, we felt like we had to make the best possible game we could. And we put everything we had into that, including all of our time and our money. We didn't care about PR or marketing or any of this kind of stuff. We couldn't afford it anyway. So we knew that no matter what way we cut it, we had to produce something that looked and felt and played really well. And the only way we could do that was to make something that played to our strengths as a team. So the game is kind of a horror-ish game because we like horror games. It's very graphics heavy because we were a team of 10 artists and one coder. So it's very code light, art heavy. So as I'm saying, it was a series of practical decisions that made us arrive with the shape of this game arrive. It wasn't because we had some genius master plan at the beginning. We just took it as it went and we tried to do the best we could with what we had. And that was, we thought that was the way to increase our chances. Our only chance was, in fact, our only chance for any kind of attention was to produce something that was different but really well executed, so that people at least would be able to say, oh, this is, we were in with a chance then in the fight for, press oxygen and attention from platform holders, and that was kind of how we approached it. The other thing I'd like to sort of quickly, firstly I'll go on to the reception. This is all very old now, but we know that the game is played by all ages. It seems to have very broad appeal. That's not something that we necessarily planned. But remember, if you make something that's based on the touch interface that deals with a control system that everybody knows, anyone who has a tablet or a phone knows how to use the touch interface. So if you make a game based on that interface, you're already making your game pretty accessible, even if the content of the game is kind of hardcore-ish, and that's kind of where we come from. Like, we're PC and console gamers. We wanted to make a game that we would like, that people like us would like. We knew that there was millions of console gamers out there who have phones but would never play a mobile phone game for the same reason we wouldn't, right? Because those games are just not directed at people like us. So we were like, why don't we make something that we would like to play, that we think would be interesting, so that we could at least appeal to that group. If not to everybody, we don't know how to appeal to everybody. But we can make something that we know is interesting and deals with themes and gameplay types that we would find, just interesting. And so that's kind of where it came from, right? Was this urge to build something that we thought wasn't on the App Store, that was missing. And just by dint of doing that, it turns out that the game turned out to be very accessible, and a lot of people got into it. And we now get emails from, old people, young people, families, kids, parents, everybody telling us that they like our game. So we've since discovered it's not aimed at people like us at all. It has actually found a broad appeal, and it has managed to do really well. And that's one of the great things about mobile. Is if you make something on mobile, you really are, giving yourself access to a very, very wide group of people. There's a lot of people out there looking for good stuff, right? Everyone wants, especially if you're a gamer, you want the next good thing. You want to see what new ideas are out there, and you're interested when you find them. Or if your friend comes to you and says, you got to check out this game, it's really cool. That's the kind of thing we wanted, was to make something that generated word of mouth on its own without PR or marketing, because like I said, we couldn't afford that stuff. So it had to be good in its own right. We couldn't rely on other people to sell the game for us. It had to have something about it that attracted people. So I've got 5 minutes left, so I'll just quickly talk about why. This is kind of a stupid question, but what I really want to mention is, nowadays when you're making mobile games, there's a lot of pressure on you to be, as a developer, to be good at everything, right? You have to be the perfect networker. You have to raise tons of money. You have to be brilliant at marketing. You have to be sussed in PR. You have to be great in interviews. We never believed any of that stuff at all. We figured like everything will stand or fall on the quality of the game that we produce. As gamers ourselves and as people who buy games all the time, we're only interested in quality. We don't really care about what the chatter or the industry or the press or advertising tells us is good. We're much more interested in what we like. We don't really care about the next guy over likes in that kind of way. It has to appeal to us, or it's not interesting. And I would say that still matters, right? Especially if you're making mobile games or in the mobile industry, there's a lot of pressure, like I said, to take all of these things as if they're all equally important. And I'm not knocking them. I'm not saying that if you have $1 million marketing budget, it isn't going to help you. Of course, it'll fucking help you. But at the end of the day, what's going to sell your game is your game, right? There has to be something about it that speaks to the audience, right? So as soon as your game is in front of someone, they have to choose to buy it or to play it, in this case. You can't make them do that. It has to appeal to them themselves. You have to create something that can charm an audience, right? That's actually going to speak to them on its own merits. Because that's what all the best games do. And if you are creating games, even for mobile, I would say don't look at what's in the charts or what's happening now. Think about all the best games you've ever played. And then make your game in that spirit, not the spirit of what the industry is telling you should be doing, because the industry is broadly wrong, right? 95% of the games industry they're followers. They're not leaders. They're not interested in being leaders. They want to follow and make money that way. And they'll tell you to be a follower, right? Look at this game, do what that's doing, make a Clash of Clans, make a match 3 game, have your marketing set up, make it multiplayer, all of that stuff. That's the thinking of followers. If you want to sell your video game, if you actually want to make money, you have to think like a leader. And that means look at all the best games you've ever played, the classics that are out there, the stuff that we all know is great, that happens to sell loads as well. Just remember that it's not a bad business decision to put all of your eggs into making a great video game. I'm not saying that it'll work for everybody, and I'm not saying that the marketing and PR aspect doesn't work for other people. All of these things do work. It's just to say that you're not crazy to think that making a great video game is a way to make money in the industry. If you think about all of the greatest games that we've all played, and all the games that sell the most, they genuinely are, more or less, the best games in the world. It's not an accident, right? It's not because they've been marketed really well. GTA 5 really is good. It really is. It's not an accident. Those guys are not trying to fool people into buying their video game with fancy marketing techniques. They're genuinely trying to make the best video game in the world that they can. And everybody, no matter what scale company you are, whether you're a rock star with 2,000 people or a company of our size with like 10 to 15, you have to think like that. You have to try and create a video game that can compete with the best that's out there. And if you don't, your chances are massively reduced. If you only listen to marketing people and PR people and VCs and publishers telling you what you should be making and what the audience already likes, you're already kind of losing, because you're now going into a track where there's about 10,000 developers ahead of you, and they all have more money than you. And so just bear that in mind, I would say. Think about your audience. Your audience is the most important thing of all. It's more important than the industry. It's more important than anything you could do within the industry. You need to make the audience love your video game, and that's the way to, we would say, especially if you're small, that's something you can count on. The audience has taste. You have taste. So try and marry the two together. And I think I'm done.
Okay. Thank you, Barry, for a very delightful speech. Just 1 minute. Do we have any questions? We have one, two. Wow.
Thank you. Thanks for a very good presentation. It was very interesting.
No problem.
I think one thing that set apart your game from the Hippo other games on the iOS store is that you guys decided to go premium, and at least initially with a pretty high price tag compared to other games. How come you decided to monetize your game in that way?
Because we felt games are worth money. Simple as that. We didn't want to make a free game. We don't want to make games for people who don't want to pay for video games. We don't understand that audience. So why would we do that? So that was literally that. And then when we showed it to Apple, we said, we're thinking of $4.99, which was a lot for the time. And they were like, you're dead right. We think $4.99. Go for it. So that was it, really. It was, like I said, we didn't ever look at mobile as very different to a console. We just saw it as a much more widely used platform. But other than that, it's a screen and a bunch of hardware, and you can do what you want. You can do anything on this platform you want. It's the industry now that's telling us that we have to make certain games for certain people in a certain way. And you know, I'm afraid that it's extremely difficult to get a leg up on that ladder. It's extremely difficult. So especially if you're small, I would say go the other way, right? Try and be different. Try and stand out. Try and make people look up from the game they're playing to your game. And to do that, you have to be different. You can't be the same. So yeah, that was our thinking.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hello. Thank you for the very motivative speech. And I would like to ask about how long is your game in terms of playing hours? And is it really matters for gamers?
It does matter. We got a lot of complaints. It's an hour and a half long. People love the game. Like, don't get me wrong. People love the game, but they're used to playing for longer than that. And the first version of the room was an hour and a half long. So what we did was, after we made a bunch of money and we were really happy, we made a whole downloadable section of the game free for those players, and it became 25% longer, maybe 30% longer. And we did that as like a way of saying thank you to people, because we knew that it was short even when we made it. Like I said, we had no budget, so we had to make it a certain size. But the second game was 2.5 hours, and the room 3 is about a 6 to 7 hour game.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no worries. I think I have to stop now, so thanks guys.